Jake Hirschman here with Nicole Britenriker from Learfield-IMG College, here to talk about interview follow-up. And look, the interview process, we've talked a little bit about in terms of preparation, execution, et cetera, but the follow-up process is so key. Understanding, thank you notes and the correct timing, the way to do it, asking for feedback, keeping relationships intact, never burning a bridge, all things that we'll get into today with Nicole. So Nicole, appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here and share as much as I can.
So when you think about the follow-up process in an interview, right, whether it be the first one that you're just having with that HR professional, as we may have talked about, whether it be the one with the hiring manager, or maybe the very, very final one, because that's the end of the line with the process. What does that follow-up look like for you, and how can you kind of cater it to who you are and not just try and do it just to do it?
Mm-hmm. A lot is there, Jake. And I think the last piece you said is most important, not just follow up to do it. So I'll get a little more into detail with that. But to start, always thank the person you are talking to about an opportunity. And that goes for informational calls where it might not even be job specific, where you're just networking, to having the opportunity to talk about a potential internship, paid or non-paid, or, a full-time role with an organization. And that thank you, it is absolutely okay to do that by way of email. And honestly, doing your due diligence to find an email address or not having an email address is not a good enough excuse to avoid that. Put some equity into it, search online, email somebody you do know in the company and have been liaisoning with, and figure it out from there. My salespeople will probably know that best, trying to cold call and cold email folks and finding out the different combinations to make that possible. Handwritten notes are always welcome and always appreciated. Obviously, by way of snail mail, that's a little longer. And I would say if you choose the thank you route note, that is okay and great, but you need to still send the email as it's going to be expected earlier than that piece of mail is going to arrive. It is a little challenging in our latest virtual working world to obtain mailing addresses, as most of us are working home in our pandemic environment. So sending it to the office is not really going to make sense right now. And obviously obtaining a home address is going to be off the table. So LinkedIn is also another great route to send messages there, but the email is certainly the best and most suggested. And that should be done within 24 hours of your conversation.
Yeah, I was going to ask about timing, but also preference, right? And it's okay to ask. So if I'm finishing up an interview with you, Nicole, and I just simply ask at the end, hey, I really appreciate your time. How would you prefer that I follow up with you? And when, right? And, they might say, hey, send me an email, thank you note next week. Here's my email, right? It opens the door so where you don't even have to ask for their email. But if they insinuate that, hey, send me an email, it's kind of like, okay, well, you just told me to send you an email, so can I have it, right?
Yeah.
It makes it easy there. So how do you ask, and do you just, is it the last question that you ask when you kind of end the conversation?
You can approach it a couple different ways. If it's not the recruiter in that moment, or if you don't have anyone's contact information, I think it's absolutely appropriate and okay to say, I would love to follow up with you and listen and thank you. After asking if that's okay, permission, I think it is typically supported and people are appreciative of that request, where they're going to volunteer and share it with you. And maybe they're not, and that's okay too. I don't take offense to that. A lot of professionals are getting hundreds of emails a day, and some of them are intentionally less accessible, as who needs to be the point of contact might be another individual, or their day-to-day responsibilities just don't allow for that. Asking, okay, fine. certainly appropriate and I think appreciated. I often have candidates who come back and ask me, hey, Nicole, thanks for scheduling the interviews on my behalf. Had great calls with this VP or that general manager. Do you mind shooting me their email addresses so I can send a thank you? And I'm obviously very happy to oblige.
Yeah, that key there is also, if you're part of an interview process, that person who may be in a virtual world just is sitting on Zoom just to make sure it goes okay. Make sure you send that person a thank you too, right? Just because you didn't see their face or you didn't talk to them doesn't mean that you can't send them a thank you. And that kind of goes without saying. You mentioned the detail component of making sure that it's personalized to you and it's not just a follow-up, just a follow-up.
Yeah. And what was going to add, and I'm appreciative of you reminding me of that, is be creative, stand out. Anyone can send a 2-line thank you note. Thank you for your time. Very interested in the role. Goodbye. That's not making an impression, right? So articulating and highlighting things that you heard that are needed of the role that you can bring immediate value to, point that out. Remind the recruiter, remind the interviewer of the things that you bring with your skill set, your resume, your background, or the things that you heard that are challenges that they need, that you'd be happy to jump into and dive into right away, and how and why. So always really showing, again, that research, that you are listening, that you have the abilities, is going to continue to get you to that next step, by continuing to be impressive and stand out and separate yourself from the talent pool that starts off in a very wide funnel and narrows down through the process. So continuing to press and show why you're the best person for the role needs to be done in the thank you as well. And there's different ways to do that, whether it's reattaching not only your resume, but a supportive document on how you would go about the role. Prior experiences or things that you've done that show a project plan, or experiences of how you have a track record of creating something that is going to be the same as you were in this role, or even testimonials. I've seen people do that. So
references, right? Like references, even just attaching them of, hey, just following up, here are a few references to try and ultimately, speak on my behalf, right? That might be the very, very last thing. But at what point do you send the thank yous through an interview process? Because obviously you don't really know when you're going to get to the next interview, right? Like you're hoping you get all the way through and to the end and you get the job. But at the end of the day, when do you send those thank yous?
Yeah, every step of the way. Every step of the way. So every time, let's say you start with me and we have a call on a Tuesday, I'm the recruiter. I make the recommendation for you to then talk to the hiring manager to be considered for the role. And that's the following Tuesday. You should email them. Maybe they recommend you talking to another peer on the team or a potential teammate, and you connect with them. They should get a thank you. The vice president, whoever it is, everybody should have a touch point of thanks, appreciation, and that same approach to unique, thoughtful response, but different. No copy pasting, no sending the same blanket statements out, but continuing to reassure people that you're the person for the job, because quite frankly, the way you are going to be working with each person you speak with is probably a little different. You might be on the same team, but the way you might be a peer to somebody is going to be different on how you might be directly supporting somebody else. So continuing to show the value you can bring on the full landscape of responsibilities you're going to have is going to help you connect with each individual person you speak with in the process and separate yourself, which again is the key here. The goal isn't to just get the interview, the goal is to get the job. So finding out and learning along the way and being the best person is the goal.
All right. So you mentioned the goal is to get the job, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't get it. And you got to ask for feedback of what could I have done better? And so when you think about, again, who to ask feedback to, right? How to ask feedback, you're probably not asking for feedback in a handwritten note. You might ask that one on via email, but you tell me. I mean, how do you go about the feedback process?
Um, yes, you are correct. So if it depends how you're being told you're not getting the role. If that is coming by way of phone call, then ask the person who is sharing, hey, we're going into a different direction, in the most professional way. Always be appreciative for the time, the opportunity, because the way you transition out of an interview process is going to be remembered just as much as the way you were interviewing throughout the process. And when you come with your best foot forward, in the interviews, you need to also come with your best foot forward if you're being dispositioned and told you're not the person, as that's character that will be remembered for other potential opportunities. And handling news with grace is, trust me, remembered more than a great interview conversation. So that's one of the things that I would say. And the thank you notes should come then. You might have been a silver medalist for the role, therefore coming in a way for you to be repositioned for other opportunities, and maybe even redirected in that same interview conversation is a possibility for you. So that's how you should approach every job, is to be redirected towards something that is probably a better fit. If you were not the best candidate in that particular process, is always the mindset you should have in any of these conversations. And the thank yous go a long way. You want that person to also potentially remain a resource to you. So that's a question you can ask. Recommendations on, hi, if this is, not a fit, I was really fired up about this job. Tell me why you all felt I wasn't the person for the position, and see what they're willing to share, right? Maybe it wasn't you might not have had enough experience. Maybe you had great experience, but the person in the candidate pool who was decided upon had 3 times more. You just never know the needs of the role and the job. And depending on background, there's often things that are just edged out with candidates, and nothing you maybe potentially did wrong. But asking is okay. Seeing if recommendations on what you could do better, if there's roles that better fit your skill set. And there's nothing wrong with inquiring.
And also just asking for maybe some career advice too on, hey,
Mm-hmm.
should I keep applying for roles like this, or should I look at other areas of the business, right? Where do you see my ability to kind of get my foot in the door? If you don't get it and you ultimately, come upon another role, let's say 2 months later, do you go back to that hiring manager and, if you didn't ask them for feedback, right, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, this person's just applying for another role. Whereas perhaps maybe ask for feedback, there's another role that comes up and it gives you an excuse to go back to that person.
Yeah, that's a great point you're making, Jake. And we often have runner-ups in a lot of our interview conversations. So being a silver medalist is not a bad thing. And you want to be thought of, if not now, later. And that's often the case. So positioning it, as I mentioned before, being open-minded to other opportunities is certainly going to benefit you in the long run. And knowing if there are other roles that would be more likely for you to step into based off that process of things you've learned on why you didn't get the job, then you can redirect your search and target different skill sets and positions that are better in the long run.
Yeah. Last thing for us as we wrap up, I think, throughout the interview process, again, it's an experience, right? It's an experience in which you're creating a relationship. Maybe you've had 2-3 conversations with that person by that end of the interview process, even if you're a silver medalist. How do you keep that relationship intact going forward to where, who knows, maybe it's a year later, maybe it's 3 years later, that you just, again, continue that relationship, ask for their advice, keep in touch with them, whatever the case might be, to where it might help you out later down on the road.
Yeah. I think really good candidates and really intentional people who are persistent in career growth in pursuit of an organization and company, they do just that. And that is presenting well all the way through a process, that is following up accordingly every single step of the way, that is, accepting the role with grace, that is declining the role with grace, or that is being told you didn't get the role with grace. And thus, having open conversations to continue a relationship with you likely built with that person or multiple people in the process is one you can continue. And I would do that the same as any other relationship in the industry. You continue to stay in touch, network. Maybe every 2 months, you're circling back. Maybe you ask specifically. I often extend to my candidates to remain a resource to them throughout the process and for future opportunities. Generally speaking, most organizations are sharing their opportunities online in their career sites. So keeping a pulse on those every so often as things open constantly. And there's really generally no rhyme or reason to the timeliness of that, unless we're talking seasonal roles, part-time roles that are specifically around kickoff, tip off, and times of year, the seasonality of some of our seasons in sports. But otherwise, ask, hey, can we, reach out every once in a while to touch base, catch up, understand what's going on with them, let them know what's been going on with you, where your mindset is, what you're currently seeking in opportunities, what you've been doing to help grow your skill sets that you were lacking in the last time we had conversations, to better help that person position you for roles the next time a position comes up that might be of interest on both sides.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great advice. And any last thoughts as you think about the interview follow-up process as a whole, going back to when you were a student and maybe what you didn't do that you should have?
Well, I'll lend one thing that I always share. One of my favorite words is professional persistence. And what I mean by that is, I talked about before, connecting with folks who are in your network who can endorse you on your behalf when you start pursuing jobs and roles. That does not mean you need to email and have people email on your behalf every single individual in the organization. That means be intentional in a professional way to get your name elevated, to get to the decision maker, to have them take a look at your application to get that call. Okay. And doing it in a respectful way that is not overwhelming, and to the hiring team who's going to be receiving all of the same emails. You want to be remembered positively, not negatively as overkill. And I would also add respecting the process of the people you're working and hiring with at the same time. Take the advice on the process and work back with them directly is also going to be a positive reception of the organization's process. And at the end of the day, get better each time. Take what you didn't go right if you don't get the job, and build on it for the next time. Refine, get better, and just learn.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you for the insights, Nicole. Appreciate it. And again, that was kind of our discussion around interview follow-up, the process, feedback, and keeping relationships intact. Thanks, Nicole.
Absolutely.